He thought he got away with it. For nearly 6 decades, no one came knocking. No arrest, no trial, no justice, just silence. But then, when he was 92 years old, living quietly in a retirement flat in Suffolk, his door swung open, and the police were there. What they told him? That they were charging him with the rape and murder of a 75-year-old woman. A woman he had crossed paths with back in the summer of 1967. A woman named Louisa Dunne. For 60 years, her family had waited. For 60 years, her name had faded from headlines. And for 60 years, the man who took her life walked free. Until science caught up. Because hidden in the fibers of her skirt was his DNA. This is the story of how the oldest cold case in the United Kingdom was finally solved, and how a ghost from the past became the face of a murder trial that would shake the system. It was late June, the year 1967. Louisa Dunne, a 75-year-old widow, lived alone in a modest flat in Easton, a quiet neighborhood in Bristol. She was the kind of woman who kept to herself, independent, tidy, a familiar face on her street. But then she stopped answering her door. Her curtains stayed drawn, mail began to pile up, and neighbors started to whisper. On the evening of June 27th, residents nearby heard a chilling scream echo through the street, sharp, sudden, and out of place. But no one could tell exactly where it came from. The next morning, when police forced their way into Louisa's home, they found a scene that would haunt Bristol for decades. Her lifeless body was discovered lying on the floor. She had been raped and murdered. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that led to anyone known, no suspect, just a horrific crime frozen in time. And just like that, Louisa Dunne's name became a cold case file. Back in 1967, detectives did everything they could. They combed the flat for evidence. They collected fibers, took photographs, and even found a partial palm print on the neighbor's window, likely left by the killer trying to flee unseen. But fingerprint technology was limited, and DNA science didn't exist yet. They had no name, no witnesses, no motive. Over the next few years, investigators compared over 19,000 sets of fingerprints to the palm print found at the scene. None matched. The trail went dark. The headlines stopped. And slowly, Louisa's story faded. But her family never forgot. For decades, her daughter and granddaughter quietly held on to hope. Hope that someday, somehow, justice would find its way back to that quiet street in Easton. But as the years passed, so did any realistic chance, at least in the eyes of most. That is, until a cold case team opened a dusty file box more than half a century later, and something they found inside changed everything. It started with a skirt blue, decades old, carefully preserved in evidence storage. In 2023, detectives from the Avon and Somerset cold case team reopened Louisa Dunne's file. 17 boxes of evidence were pulled out of storage. Among them, the skirt Louisa had been wearing the night she died. This time, science had caught up. Forensic expert Andrew Perry extracted a full DNA profile from fibers taken from the skirt and a hair fragment left behind. The odds of a match were calculated at 1 in 1 billion. That DNA profile was uploaded into the national database, and there it was a match. But the story didn't end there. That same palm print found on the neighbor's window, it was reanalyzed using modern tech. 4 separate experts confirmed what the DNA already told them. It belonged to the same man. After nearly 60 years, Louisa Dunne's killer finally had a name. And it wasn't some long dead mystery figure. He was still alive, still walking free, and living just a few hours away. The name that emerged from the database was Ryland Headley. At the time of Louisa Dunne's murder, he was 34 years old and living in the very same neighborhood east in Bristol. He wasn't a stranger to the area. And as it turned out, he wasn't a stranger to violence either. What police uncovered next sent shockwaves through the investigation. In 1977, just 10 years after Louisa's death, Headley had been convicted of raping two elderly women in their own homes. One victim was 79, the other was 84. He served only a short sentence after his conviction was reduced on appeal. Still, no one linked him to Louisa back then. Not until that DNA swab, taken during a separate investigation in 2012, quietly entered the national system and waited there, unnoticed, until cold case detectives reactivated her file. By then, Headley was a frail old man living in Ipswich, but the evidence didn't care about age. When officers knocked on his door, he claimed he didn't remember anything about that night in 1967. He denied it all, said he was innocent, said he couldn't recall ever meeting Louisa Dunne. But the science remembered, and it was about to speak louder than he ever could. In June of 2025, Ryland Headley, now 92 years old, was wheeled into Bristol Crown Court to face charges of rape and murder. It was the beginning of a trial unlike any other, not just because of how much time had passed, but because of how precise the evidence had become. The prosecution laid it all out. The 1 in a billion DNA match from Louisa Dunne's skirt, the palm print untouched for nearly 60 years, now verified by 4 separate experts, and the testimony from survivors of Headley's other assaults, elderly women he had attacked in a strikingly similar way just a decade after Louisa's death. The defense claimed memory loss. They said the man sitting in that courtroom could barely remember what he had for breakfast, let alone events from the summer of 1967. But the jury wasn't swayed. After years of silence, after files gathering dust for generations, the evidence finally got its day in court. And on June 30th, the verdict came in guilty of rape and of murder. It was official. The United Kingdom's oldest cold case had just been solved. When the judge delivered the sentence, the courtroom fell silent. Ryland Headley was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. At 92, it was a death sentence in all but name. But for Louisa Dunne's family, it wasn't about the years left, it was about the years lost. Her granddaughter, Mary Dainton, stood in court and spoke through tears. She said she never believed justice would come, that after decades of silence, she had accepted Louisa's story might never be finished. But now, standing there, watching her grandmother's killer finally held accountable, she felt something she hadn't felt in 60 years: peace. The judge didn't hold back either. He called the crime depraved, calculated, and cruel beyond measure. He spoke directly to Headley, reminding him that the impact of his violence stretched far beyond that summer night. It had haunted an entire family, a whole community, for generations. The sentence wasn't just for Louisa, it was for everyone who had waited, for everyone who had been told cold cases don't get solved. And now, thanks to a scrap of fabric, a fingerprint, and relentless determination, one of the oldest unsolved murders in British history had finally come full circle. The case of Louisa Dunne isn't just about DNA or palm prints or courtroom verdicts. It's about something bigger, something timeless. It's about the idea that no matter how long it takes, truth has a way of surfacing. That justice, though delayed, is still possible even when the killer is 92 and the victim has been gone for nearly 6 decades. But it also raises questions that linger. Should a man that old, frail, and sickly be sent to prison for life? Is there value in punishing someone who might not even remember the crime? For Louisa's family, the answer was simple. Yes, because age doesn't erase guilt, and forgetting isn't the same as forgiveness. This case proves that no one is truly safe from their past, that even the coldest case can still burn, and that somewhere out there, In another dusty file box, the next breakthrough is waiting. Louisa Dunne was 75 when her life was taken. For 60 years, she was just a name in an archive. But now, she's a symbol of closure, of perseverance, of justice that may be slow but never sleeps.